Brothers and sisters in the Dharma, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bhim. So, for those of you not in the Padmaloka Shrine Room, a very warm welcome to Padmaloka on a very beautiful spring day here. Very, very beautiful day indeed. The air is really quite warm and the garden is full of flowers and blossoms, and the birds are singing, and there is this sense of, wonderful emerging life. I'm in here in the shrine room with 17 other Padmaloka community members in this, we don't know how long it will go on for, but probably for some months. This period really of extended retreat, of vihara-like abiding. We're living and working together, practicing together, studying together in this very, very strange period, this very difficult and challenging period. And every so often we are wanting to communicate how we are getting on here at Padmaloka. And I'm offering this series of talks on the Bodhicaryavatara, the entering the path of enlightenment, the guide to the Bodhisattva's life of Shantideva, and I'm offering this to anybody who wants to have a look at it on YouTube, and I'm also offering it to Bhante, to Urgyen Sangharakshita, my teacher, my Kalyana Mitra, my preceptor, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist Order. So I'm offering that up to him. And we are, of course, aware of what's going on to the extent that we can be in the world beyond our beautiful gardens, our beautiful shrine rooms, and our beautiful environment. We are very, very fortunate to be here at this time, having this opportunity to practice the Dharma intensively. Time is very strange for us. There is a kind of timeless quality to being here at this time, at this moment. But we are aware of what's going on outside. We keep an eye on the news, as I've said probably every time I've started one of these talks. But perhaps more importantly, we get a lot of messages from friends outside, messages of appreciation for what we're doing, and we're very, very thankful for that. Really, really thankful that people are telling us that they feel well supported by what we're doing, that we're practicing the Dharma and we're offering the Dharma as much as we can to those of you in very, very difficult circumstances and situations. So we're very, very thankful to have those messages. We put them up in the board near our dining room, and whenever a new message comes, so that we can all read them. And it gives us a lot of support as well, that people feel that we're practicing and living as we should be practicing and living. And we also hear, of course, accounts of how difficult it is for people. I was talking to a very close friend of mine the other day, who's an order member, who's a full-time worker in a Buddhist centre, who loves working in the Buddhist centre. He's married with 2 children. His wife is a very top oncologist in her area, in her region. And of course, she's working very, very intensively in the health service. So he's at home caring for the children so that she can carry on with her work. And he was telling me what it's like for her, some of the stories of what it's like for her. And I found that extraordinarily humbling, moving, sobering, and telling me other stories of families in need in his area and so on. And it's very important that we hear these things. It's very, very important that we hear these accounts, that we know to some extent of what it's like for people. Obviously, we only hear a fraction of what it's like. We also hear other stories of people, of course, really getting on with their Buddhist practice, and making progress in their Buddhist practice in this difficult time, really making the most of the opportunity, even though the future is uncertain, even though there's lots of concerns for family and loved ones and friends. We hear all these things, and it's very important that these things flood into us at Padmaloka. Yesterday was a very special day because it was the anniversary of the founding of the Triratna Buddhist Order, or the Western Buddhist Order, as it was called in those days. It was the anniversary, the 7th of April 1968, I think I've got that right. It's the anniversary of the first ordinations. So this is something to really mark, that the order has been in existence for a very long time, from very, very small, very, very humble beginnings. It has grown and spread across the countries, across the nations, from those very, very humble beginnings. I think either today or the day before yesterday is the anniversary of FWBO Day, the founding of the movement, the FWBO, Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, Triratna community as we call it now. That was founded a year before the first ordinations, which, perhaps has its own symbolism. Friends, as it were, came before order members, so to speak. And it's interesting, back in the day, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe even in the early 2000s, we really celebrated the day of the founding of the order and the day of the founding of the movement. We had a day each. We used to have the nearest weekend. And they were very important days. Bhante's set great store by anniversaries, really marking where you've come from. He said it was one of the things he appreciated about Christmas Humphreys, one of the great pioneers of Buddhism in the West, involved in the Buddhist Society, president of the Buddhist Society for many, many years. He had a great sense of history, and especially Buddhist history, and marking those anniversaries. So I want to begin this talk by just reading to you from Bhante's diary. This is from the History of My Going for Refuge, which is a very important book by Bhante. And this book was originally a paper read out on the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Western Buddhist Order. And he read from his diary, which had just come to light at that time. Arrived at Centre House at 10:15. Found nothing ready. Cleared and arranged a room, set up shrine, etc. People started coming, including bhikkhus. Started at 11:15, welcomed by Jack Austin. Had lunch with bhikkhus and Jack, while Mike Rogers conducted first meditation. Emil Boyne very worried, as Indians who had undertaken to provide lunch did not turn up until very late. At 12 o'clock, spoke on the idea of the Western Buddhist Order and the Upasaka ordination. We used to call the Dharmachari ordination the Upasaka ordination in those days. Then, while others were having lunch, spoke to the press. Many photographs taken. Guided group discussion, meditation, tea, more press people and more photographs. At 5:30, spoke on the Bodhisattva vow. At 7 o'clock, conducted ordination ceremony, which lasted till 8:15. Mike Ricketts, Mike Rogers, Sarah Boyne, Emil Boyne, Terry O'Regan, Stephen Parr, Margarita Khan, Jeffrey Webster, John Hipkin, Roy Brewer, Penny Neil-Smith, and David Waddle received their public ordinations. Everything went off very smoothly and successfully. All most pleased. Well, it's not almost pleased, all most pleased. So it's a lovely little, very intimate kind of insight into that momentous event, Bhante conducting those first ordinations. One of the people ordained at that time is still alive, still in the order, that's Ananda. Stephen Parr, Wonderful that we have somebody from the first ordination still with us, still practicing, still part of the Triratna Buddhist Order. So it all goes back to that time. And you notice that at that time, on that day, Bhante gave a lecture on the Bodhisattva vow. He said later that it was a straightforward talk on the Bodhisattva vow, the arising of the Bodhicitta, the practice of the paramitas. And he said he thought that the reason why he did that was to make it clear of the altruistic dimension of going for refuge, the altruistic aspect of ordination. So right at the beginning of things, right at the first ordination, Bhante invoked the Bodhisattva vow, that we become order members, we become dharmacharis and dharmacharinis for the benefit of all beings. And indeed, there are those four, we sometimes call them the ordination vows, those verses that Bhante composed himself, which represent the spirit with which ordination is given and with which it's received. With loyalty to my teachers, I accept this ordination. In harmony with friends and companions, I accept this ordination. For the attainment of enlightenment, I accept this ordination. For the benefit of all beings, I accept this ordination. So it's right there, right at the beginning of things. It's there in every ordination. The bodhicitta, the arising of the bodhicitta, the bodhisattva vow is there. It's intrinsic to going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. That's the way Bhante sees it. So I'm very pleased to be offering this talk today in honour of Bhante and in honour of the founding of the order. So in a way I also offer this talk to the whole order and to all those who want to be in the order, all those involved in our wider movement and in our spiritual community. I offer it to you all. So last week, which does almost seem like yesterday and an eon ago, like I say, time is very peculiar at the moment. Towards the end of the talk, I talked about that wonderful verse that I must say, don't understand it, because I think it's very, very profound indeed. Taking this impure image of the human form, the bodhicitta transmutes it into the priceless image of the jewel of the conqueror. Grasp tightly this highly potent quicksilver elixir known as the bodhicitta, which must be thoroughly worked. And this whole idea that the bodhicitta, the force, the consciousness, the mind, the volition of wisdom and compassion that we're in touch with, or the bodhisattva is in touch with, it has the quality of the alchemist's quicksilver elixir. And I spoke particularly about the Tonglen, the sending and receiving meditation, the transmutation of everything painful and difficult, in a way everything evil and hard and so on, into the bodhicitta itself, into Buddhahood itself. It's a big theme of the Bodhicaryavatara, which we'll see as we go on. But that phrase, grasp tightly this highly potent quicksilver elixir, grasp tightly. A very interesting word that keeps coming up in the Bodhicaryavatara, especially in the early chapters. Graha and various variations of it. Graha, parigraha, get hold of, grasp, take hold of, fully embrace, take to heart, has these different meanings. And I want to just sort of dwell on that a little bit, because the following verses also talk about, or the following verse, one of the most poignant verses I find in the whole of Buddhist literature, also has this language of taking hold of tightly. You who are accustomed to travelling abroad among the trading towns of the realms of rebirth, Grasp tightly this jewel that is the bodhicitta. It is precious, assayed by those of immeasurable expertise, the unique caravan leaders of the world. Again, this word, grasp tightly, gruha again, or a variation thereof. You really need to not let go of this bodhicitta. It's so important to hold on to it through all your journeyings, throughout all of your rebirths. It's the most priceless jewel you could possibly have. And it's very, very poignant, isn't it? The way a life is described. This life, lives to come, lives before. We're just in trading towns. Trading towns, places where people meet and pass and do commerce with one another, communicate with one another. There's a brief meeting and then a parting. I find that very, very poignant, that image for life itself. We're just here for a short time, interacting with each other, and then we're moving on. All of us are like that. Just turning up in these trading towns. One of the things that comes to mind when I hear this word trading town is railway towns in India. There are these towns in India which have just grown up at railway junctions. There was nothing particularly there until the railway system was built by the British, or under British supervision. It was built by Indians, of course. But these railway towns are so interesting because often they're quite ugly. Very, very ugly. I remember giving a lecture, a number of lectures in a railway town in Maharashtra called Munmud, and really, really ugly town in many, many ways. Just a place where people have sort of been thrown up, a junction between different railway systems. But there was a thriving Buddhist community there that wanted the Dharma. Yes, railway towns, trading towns. One of the things I sometimes find is that in my life and work is that I meet a lot of people. Maybe I don't meet as many of some of you listening to this talk, but I meet a lot of people from different countries, sometimes on retreats here, and we're missing having the retreats here, by the way. I'll meet a lot of people. Sometimes in a day I'll meet 4 or 5 people, and the meetings might be quite brief. Sometimes I won't even know whether the next time I'll actually meet them. And sometimes it has to be said, I remember one time in particular, I kind of wondered, well, what was the good of that meeting? What did that meeting do? What did that meeting do for that person and for me? That brief encounter where we sat and had tea and asked each other how we were and what we were doing, and did we go to any great depth? Sometimes one doesn't. It's not possible to go to any great depth. And then I thought of this verse: "You who are accustomed to travelling abroad among the trading towns of the realms of rebirth." And I thought to myself, no, what's important about any meeting is whether the bodhicitta is present, whether there is the essence of emptiness and compassion, the shunyata karanagarbha, as it's called in some Indian Buddhist traditions, whether that is present in some way, whether in a very simple way, in a very ordinary, whether there's awareness of the other person, really taking them in, and whether there's friendliness and kindness. If that's there, the meeting might be brief. It might be very transient. It might never happen again, but it will be meaningful. So hold tightly to that bodhicitta through all your journeyings. If you've found a connection with wisdom and compassion, or awareness and loving kindness, if you have a feeling for the bodhicitta in any way whatsoever, never let go of it. Hold on to it in all of your dealings, in all of your journeyings, in all of your meetings. As he goes on to say, it is precious, assayed. I had to look up the word assay. An assay office is where they determine the quality of the jewel. I think particularly of the diamond. What particular, I'm not an expert on, we've got some Dutch people here, I'm sure they know all about jewels, and how you assay them. But what Shantideva means is that the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, they know the quality of this Bodhicitta, of this jewel. They know its unique quality. Sometimes we need that. We need friends to tell us, no, that is the quality that you're in touch with. Don't let go of that, because we might be in doubt of its quality. We might be finding that life is so overwhelming, or there are so many distractions. We doubt the quality of what we're in touch with, the quality of that jewel, which is the Bodhicitta, or at least a feeling for the Bodhicitta, a reflection of the Bodhicitta. So hold on to it. Hold on to it tightly. Take it to heart. Keep it in your heart. Avalokiteshvara, the four-armed, all the four-armed Avalokiteshvara, the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara, which is the symbol for our order, holds to his heart constantly the Chintamani, the wish-fulfilling gem, which is said to be the Bodhicitta. That never ever goes from his heart, and it's held there perfectly, firmly. I want to stay with this theme of grasping, this theme of graha, of taking hold of. It's interesting, sometimes you might think, well, why is he using the language of grasping? Why is he using the language of holding on to things tightly? Isn't that craving? Isn't that grasping? Isn't that attachment? Isn't that something negative? And of course we are warned, and I think it's an important warning, not to grasp after spiritual attainments, not to try and grab an experience and pull it into ourselves without any transformation. And of course, Shantideva doesn't mean that. That's not what he means by taking hold of tightly, firmly, really keeping it in you, keeping it in your heart. He doesn't mean trying to appropriate something and pull it into you. What Bhante, I don't know if he was quoting someone or he used the phrase himself in that lecture, Enlightenment as Experience and as Non-Experience. It's not a smash and grab raid on the absolute as we try and grab some spiritual goodie to cover up or distract us from the abyss of the inner emptiness within us. That's not what Shantideva means by taking hold of this jewel of the Bodhicitta. He means you take hold of it by living it, by practicing it, by transforming your whole life. But how does he go on to do that? How to practice? There's so much practice in the Bodhicaryavatara, so many ways of practicing, so that we can stay constantly in touch with the Bodhicitta. But in chapter 2, he does it like this. In order to fully embrace, that's a translation of graha again. You could say in order to fully take hold of, in order to fully take in order to fully embrace the Bodhicitta, that precious jewel of the mind, I offer worship to the Buddhas and to the flawless jewel of the true Dharma, and to the sons of the Buddha who are oceans of virtue. I offer to them now as many flowers and fruits as there are in the world, as many healing herbs, as many jewels and all waters, clear and refreshing. I offer mountains made of precious stones, and forest groves to be enjoyed in solitude, vines blazing with flowers, and trees whose branches bend low with delicious fruit. I offer fragrances of the celestial realms, the wishing tree with fruits of jewels, pools and lakes adorned with lotuses, and the endlessly fascinating cry of wild geese. I offer rich harvests, both wild and those sown by men. I offer anything that can adorn those worthy of worship. I offer everything which no one owns, within the limitless spheres of space. Seizing all these in my imagination, I offer them to the bulls among the sages and to their sons. O compassionate ones, you who are worthy of the choicest gifts, tender towards me, accept these offerings of mine. Having no merit, I am completely destitute, and I have nothing else to offer in worship. O protectors, you who think only of helping others, accept these for my sake. And I give myself, in my entire self, wholly to the conquerors and to their sons. Take possession of me, O sublime beings. In devotion I become your slave. Having become your possession, I have nothing more to fear in existence. I act only for the welfare of all. I shall completely escape my previous evils, and in the future shall commit no more. So it's the way he takes hold of the bodhicitta is through puja, through worship, through offering. That's the way he takes hold of the bodhicitta. That's the way he draws it in, the way he draws it closer to him. And it's really quite a sort of remarkable way of thinking about getting hold of something, that you worship it. Of course, it's the expression of his profound love for the bodhicitta. It's quite obvious for Shantideva that he's had some vision, some experience of the bodhicitta. So it's obviously the most beautiful, the most meaningful, the most profound thing, whatever you call it, that in life, in existence, beyond existence. It's so overwhelmingly beautiful, and the response is to worship, to adore, to adorn. Sangharakshita once said that he was criticized for his flowery language in the survey of Buddhism by some people, that they thought it was too poetic and so on. Some of the passages. And a friend of his he was talking to about it, he smiled, this friend of his, and said, "That which you love, you adorn." Beautiful phrase. That which you love, you adorn. It means if you really love the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, if you really love the bodhicitta, of course you'll adorn them. You're going to want to adorn them with the most pleasing things, the most lovely things that you can possibly find. That's the expression of your emotional involvement with the bodhicitta. It's interesting as well that it's not, he doesn't, as it were, worship the bodhicitta in the abstract. He worships the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. The Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are the very crystallizations of the bodhicitta. The bodhicitta isn't an abstraction. You could even say there's no such thing as the bodhicitta. There are only beings in whom the bodhicitta has arisen. As Sangharakshita says, there's no such thing as enlightenment. There's only enlightened people, enlightened beings. I think this is one of the great sort of problems with Buddhism in the modern world, Buddhism in the West. Everything becomes an abstraction. It becomes one-sidedly intellectual. We think we know it because we understand it. And when you think you know something, you feel superior to it. You've sort of mastered it in some way. But I think this whole language of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as crystallizations of bodhicitta, who you engage with through offering, through devotion, through worship, it's taking it out of the abstract and the intellectual realm. It's coming into the realm of public, physical, concrete reality. It's coming into in a way, the materiality of life, the rupa of life. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The transcendental must come into that which is formed. It must be expressed in material culture. So it's not enough to have Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that you visualize. Of course, you're going to want to paint them and make them, as our wonderful Aloka has done in this shrine room. This is the bodying forth, if you like, of our response to the Bodhicitta, our response to the Bodhicitta, to the way we want to make it come closer to us. So you worship, you offer to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas all beautiful things. Of course, there are people who believe this way of talking, this way of practicing, this way of living is a sort of falling away from the pristine ideal of early Buddhism, the Buddha and his close disciples. When the sal trees beneath which the Buddha was lying as he entered parinirvana, when they unseasonably burst into blossom and fell upon the Buddha, didn't the Buddha kind of rebuke Ananda and say, that isn't the way to worship the Tathagata. That isn't the way to worship the enlightened one. The way to worship is to practice his Dhamma. But as Bhante said in his own commentary on that, Ananda was already a very devotional man. He needed another kind of teaching. He said, but we are not Ananda. The Buddha's not talking to us. The Buddha was talking to Ananda, and he said, no, we should be bringing armfuls of flowers to offer to the Buddha. That would represent much more where we are. And in any case, what is puja? What is it to make offerings? Shantideva's puja is extraordinarily lavish and imaginative. It's visualized, it's taking hold of in his mind all the glorious things in this world that he's seen, that he knows. He's conjuring all those up to offer. But what would have worship been in the time of the Buddha? There was puja in the time of the Buddha. I mean, the Buddha does talk about worshipping the worshipful. Pujacha pujaniyanam in the Mangala Sutta. You worship those who are worthy of worship, who have worth and value. But worship in Indian tradition is very much derived from the way you treat the guest, from the way you treat people. And of course there are many, many stories in the Pali Canon where the Buddha comes to a group of people, whether they're monks or nuns or laymen and laywomen, and of course the first thing they do when they greet him is to make him a comfortable seat, is to bring water for him to wash his feet, water for him to drink, and of course there is the invitation to eat. And we know as well that flower offerings were made to the Buddha, even though there is a rule for the monks not to wear garlands. We know that flower offerings were made, and all sorts of offerings were made to the Buddha because people felt immense gratitude to the Buddha. But he was also the guest, the honoured guest, coming into their life. And I think we need to approach puja in this way. We need to approach puja as the way we, as it were, welcome in the other, in this case the transcendental other, into our lives. And I must say, I learned a lot about puja living in India. I learned a lot about what puja really means by living and working with my Indian brothers and sisters, and particularly the way guests were treated. I mean, just ordinary guests like myself, or seeing friends of mine, Indian friends of mine, the way we would be treated when we came to somebody's home. It could be the poorest, most uneducated person, but the culture of those people, the culture of the people in those homes and in those places was far superior to my own. The culture of hospitality, the grace with which we were received, the way we were treated, the way we were made comfortable, the way we were given lovely things, the way we were given sort of priority in the home. That taught me a lot about what puja really means, what puja really is. I think one of the reasons why people have difficulty with puja in the West, it's partly, I think, because perhaps in quite a lot of areas, we've lost the culture of welcome. We've lost the culture of courtesy, of how we meet people and how we are with anybody, of just taking in the other. I had this, horrible experience some weeks ago before the lockdown. I was catching a train at Farringdon. I'd got off the tube and I'd gone to get a cup of coffee somewhere, and I nearly got run over, not by cars but by people. People looking at these things in front of their face and not actually looking at me. And they were coming towards me with these frowns on their faces as they were talking and looking at their screens. And I was having to sort of dodge. There was no sense of the other at all. The other didn't exist as a real person. Okay, there might have been the other on the news or whatever they were looking at on their screen, or the other far away, but the other as a person in front of them did not exist for them. I think that's a terrible indictment of our culture. It's a terrible indictment of our culture, that the real person in front of you doesn't exist. And I think it's going to be very difficult then to relate to puja, where you're trying to open to the transcendental other. So there's a relationship, I think, between the way we treat other people generally and the way we treat the transcendental other of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. You get this sense of courtesy very strongly in the way people treat the guest in India, this wonderful sense of courtesy. And I was very, very struck years ago reading a book by the cultural critic George Steiner, great writer. He was talking about the way we engage with the work of art. It's a critique. It's a book called Real Presences, and it's a critique of sort of post-modernist post-structuralist, or whatever the words are, literary criticism, where you analyse the text away. And he said, no, surely that is not the way to approach the work of art. You approach the work of art with courtesy. The first way of encountering the work of art is to be courteous. He even uses the whole language of receiving the guest and having sort of good manners, if you like. And he uses the word common sense in relation to the work of art. But it's the same with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In fact, this is the language that is sometimes used. We have these 7 traditional offerings to the honoured guest, the Atiti, and the real honoured guest is the guest that can turn up at any time. In India, friends of mine would sometimes not come to an event, and they'd say, I couldn't come because we had an Atiti. So in other words, somebody had turned up unannounced. Atiti means any particular time. And they just put everything aside to welcome that guest, to care for that guest. Well, the 7 traditional offerings that you have these represented in the puja bowls on the shrine, represent that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are the honoured guests, and they come at any time. And we have to be ready and to make the space and to have all the courtesies and etiquette, if you like, of receiving them. As I said, Shantideva's worship is incredibly lavish. It goes on and on and on. I can't no time to read all the verses. With all the wonderful perfumes and silks and cloths and jewels and so on that he's imagining being offered to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. I sometimes have wondered if one of the reasons why people have difficulty with puja sometimes in our movement, because our puja isn't lavish enough. It's not lavish enough. Perhaps it's a bit too sort of stripped down. Perhaps if we had more lavish, abundant pujas, and where people even dressed up in some way and decorated themselves, and approached them in a sense with more of a sense of almost fun and celebration and joy, people would get into them a bit more. Perhaps we need a bit more of that kind of spirit of really celebrating with abundance the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And it's all expressing this supreme receptivity and openness to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In fact, there's a certain point after the verses that I quoted, Shantideva then performs the bath of the Buddhas. He invites the Buddhas into a wonderful bathing palace made with crystal pillars on all kinds of pavements. And he said, I will perform the bath of the Buddhas. I'll bathe them in perfumed waters. I'll dry them with wonderful cloths. And I'll adorn them with the most wonderfully dyed robes. So he bathes them and sort of clothes them. It's extraordinarily intimate, isn't it? Very, very intimate way of describing how you engage with the Buddhas. He's really bringing the bodhicitta into his heart in that way by performing the bath of the Buddhas through visualization. Some people will think this is completely over the top. We can't possibly think in those terms. But okay, if you can't think in those terms, how do you become more intimate with that bodhicitta? And I mean the real bodhicitta, not just a little thought about being kind and being a bit wise and being a bit mindful. I mean opening up to the vastness of emptiness and compassion. Really visualizing that, picturing that. How do you open to that? How do you bring it into the intimacies of your heart? There's wonderful little stories in the Pali Canon where there's a wonderful little story where Ananda and the Buddha bathe. They bathe together, and then Ananda massages the Buddha. Now, you could think, well, that's just what they did. That's what the monks did with each other. But there's a communication going on in that. In fact, Ananda, as he massages the Buddha, he notices how old the Buddha's skin has become. He remembered when it glowed, and now it's old. And they have quite a humorous little exchange, and there's a kind of teaching in it. The Dharma comes closer to Ananda because of that closeness. Shantideva has to do all this, as it were, with his imagination. He has to do all that. The Buddha isn't there as Shakyamuni the Buddha. He has to make the Buddhas vivid before him through visualization and through imagining their presence, their real presence before him. And puja is the way to bring that bodhicitta closer. One of the things I think that's important at this time is puja, I think. At this time of, great hardship and uncertainty and where there's a lot of fear and anxiety, I think puja becomes an even more important spiritual practice at this time because of its abundance. Early on in this period, I put the shrine together. I did a bit of work on the shrine. We don't need to do really anything in here because it's already incredibly abundant. But for some reason, I wanted yellow cloths, and I wanted to put a special cloth around the Padmasambhava image. I wanted there to be abundance because I think that the tendency at this time is to shrink back into anxiety. And I think that puja is a way of, as it were, pushing back, of being abundant. So I think at home, put a part of your house or room in your house, put it aside for a lovely shrine. Have your favourite images there, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas that you particularly love. Find some lovely cloths. Find some flowers if you can. Some blossoms. Doesn't have to be very much. Light some candles. Burn some incense. Just have those three traditional offerings there, and those wonderful reflections on those three offerings. If you like, even have the 7 bowls. I'm going to give you the teaching of the puja of filling the 7 bowls. I want to give you a teaching, a practice for this time that was given to me by Bhante, a very special teaching that he gave to me when I was 17. I was very interested in puja and shrine keeping at that time. And we had these lovely bowls that in Brighton that were given to us by the Brighton Buddhist Society, which Bhante had given to the Brighton Buddhist Society. But the president of the society, a lovely old man named Carl Ragg, said, "These are yours now." When Bhante came to dedicate our new shrine room, when we had our first centre, "These are yours now. Bhante gave them to us, but these are for you." And I talked to Bhante about it. He said, "But do you know the teaching of how to fill the puja bowls?" I said, "No, Bhante, I don't know the teaching of how to fill the puja bowls." "Well, I'll tell you the teaching of how to fill the puja bowls. So you put the puja bowls on the shrine, and you go from left to right, filling them right up with water. And as you fill the puja bowls, you chant a mantra. Very simple mantra. You chant Om, Ah, Hum." And I can remember him saying, as we sat there in this room, he said, "The Om purifies the water. It's purified of all defilement. It purifies you of all defilement and all impure motivation. You bring to mind purity. You purify everything. The Ah," he said, "glorifies the bowl. It makes it into a sort of Sambhogakaya bowl, an archetypal bowl. It's perfumed water, filled with flowers. The bowl itself is studded with jewels. It's made of beautiful, precious substances. It's a vast bowl for the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. That's what happens when you say Ah. And when you chant Hum," he said, it symbolises the emptiness of the bowl, the emptiness of you, the emptiness of the offering, the complete threefold circle of purity. Everything is offered, and yet nothing is offered, and yet everything is offered. So that's the teaching of the puja bowls. And do this at home. Do it every day. Imagine the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas before you. Welcome them into your room, into your house, and make this offering. And you can see it's not just a devotional practice when we talk like this. This is a wisdom practice. Devotion is a wisdom practice. Puja is a wisdom practice. It brings the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas closer. It brings Bodhicitta closer. It brings reality closer. As the puja goes on, Shantideva goes even further. I mentioned this verse when I read the first verse. He goes even further. He says, "Having no merit, I am completely destitute. I'm a beggar." This is actually a very profound realization. It's the realization that actually you own nothing. You possess nothing. There's this, that you are a man or a woman of nothing. This is a very important realization. We have no self. We have no ownership, because in the end, everything is taken. Everything is taken away. So this realization of our deepest poverty, our sort of metaphysical poverty, the realization of shunyata, is really, really important. It doesn't mean we don't exist. It means we're becoming supremely receptive to another kind of reality. And then in the 8th verse he says, "And I give my entire self wholly to the conquerors and their sons," to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. "Take possession of me, parigraha, take hold of me, embrace me, grasp hold of me. O sublime beings, in devotion, bhakti, I become your slave, dasa." Now this word slave, I know, will be for some people very offensive. The word dasa is most accurately translated as slave, but it could also be translated as a servant. You notice here, it's completely voluntary. Shantideva, it's very powerful for him because he's comes from a kshatriya, a warrior background. He's a monk living in a great monastery. He has a lot of privilege. But here he's expressing, ultimate surrender. Ultimate surrender to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So these wonderful offerings that are being made, in the end, they all symbolize oneself. The giving up of oneself completely to the Bodhicitta in the form of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This word devotion, bhakti, is very interesting. Sometimes people try to say, Buddhism doesn't have any relationship to bhakti, but this gives the lie to that. It's a tremendously devotional work, Shantideva's Bodhicaryavatara, as well as being a very powerful intellectual work. The word bhakti is very, very interesting etymologically. It's the same root as Bhagwan, which, throughout Indian tradition is the word for the ultimate. And of course, the Buddha is Bhagwan. The Buddha is the richly endowed one. He is the greatly compassionate one, the one who is endowed with all qualities. So our devotion is related to that. The word bhakti comes from a root meaning to have a share in. The way I like to read this, so our devotion is our share in the ultimate, our share in the qualities of enlightenment. Our devotion is a kind of reflection of the qualities of enlightenment. It doesn't mean that we're just, far away and lowly in a negative way. There's part of us that is in relationship to that. And our devotion is the beginning of the path towards the realization of all of the Buddha's qualities. And you're just opening yourself as a servant. You just want to serve the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And it goes further. Having become your possession, again this word parigraha, having become your possession, I have nothing more to fear in existence. The Buddha really is then the refuge. There's nothing to fear. The heart is completely placed on the qualities of enlightenment, on the bodhicitta. I act only for the welfare of all. When you've given yourself completely to the Buddha, from then on, your life is changed. You're just acting for the welfare of all. And I shall completely escape my previous evils, and in the future shall commit no more. Because you're always in touch with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Your life is completely in the service of that. For me, this is very, very attractive. I do realise I'm of a particular temperament, and not everybody has this kind of temperament. But for me, this makes complete sense. That if my life needs to be a surrendering to the bodhicitta, to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and it's a life of service. At the moment, that service is finding expression here at Padmaloka. I've lived here for, I don't know how, 3 decades now, I think it is. And it still feels like the beginning of things. Sometimes people say to me, when will you move on? When will you go somewhere else? And I always say, well, when it's time to go somewhere else. At the moment, this seems to be the place where I can do my best service, given the qualities that I have. So yes, this is the way Shantideva worships the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. I want to go on for a bit longer, because what all this is leading to is the practice of confession. In fact, this second chapter is called Papa Deshana, confession of evil. Papa, we looked at that word in the first talk. Papa meaning evil. It's really hard to translate it in any other way. And what he means here is unskillfulness, the effects of unskillfulness, unskillful action. It's not evil as a sort of, as it were, a kind of, force in the universe or something like that. He means the bad deeds that he's done, the unskillful actions he's done, the actions which have harmed himself and other people, not just in this life, but in previous lives. That's the perspective that Shantideva has. Deshana means literally a pointing out. It's better to translate it as confession because there's this intensity of expression in Shantideva's confession of evil. But it is, pointing out is a good word because Buddhist confession is very precise. When you're in a confessional situation, if you're in every week in our chapter meeting we have an opportunity to confess our faults of the previous week, or our tendencies that we're becoming, unskillful tendencies that we're becoming aware of. We really try to be as precise as we possibly can, identifying which particular precept has been breached that we've taken, which particular unskillful route we've been particularly indulging in. That's very important. Confession in Buddhism isn't just a sort of vague sense of being a bad person, and you don't quite know why you've been a bad person, because somebody told you were bad or something like that, or the culture told you were bad. That's not Buddhist confession. There's no irrational guilt in that sense in Buddhism. There's a clear, precise identification of unskillful action, and yes, feelings of remorse that go with that. And Shantideva's confession, of course, is to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They are the witnesses of his confession. It's very important to have a witness of your confession. It's also very important that you confess in the context of inspiration. It's not just a sort of moaning about your sort of failings, your moral failings, and you don't quite know what to do about it and you just feel bad about it. It's not really what confession, it's certainly not effective confession. It might let off a bit of steam, but it won't really achieve anything in the end. Shantideva's confession comes out of his vision of bodhicitta. The beauty of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is as if that searing sense of the sublimity of the bodhicitta makes him aware of all of that in him which is a contradiction to that. All the meanness, all the selfishness, all the harmfulness that he's done. There's just such a contrast between that and what he's in touch with in terms of the bodhicitta, what he wants to become as a bodhisattva. So he says, with hands raised in supplication, I implore the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the greatly compassionate ones throughout the universe, please listen to me. He wants them to hear. He wants them to listen. He wants them to see. Whatever evil I have done or have caused others to do, throughout the beginningless cycles of rebirth, as well as in this very birth, overwhelmed by the deceptions of ignorance and rejoicing in what I did, I confess that transgression, tormented with remorse. Whatever harm I have done in arrogance to the three jewels, to my mothers or fathers, to my teachers, or to others worthy of respect, whether with body, speech and mind, the cruel evil I have wickedly done, corrupted by many faults, O leaders, I confess it all. It's very, very powerful. It's a very, very powerful confession, tormented with remorse. So he's becoming aware of all the evil he has done. I think what Shantideva is giving expression to is a kind of insight, is a kind of wisdom. In Yogacara, you have this turning around in the deepest seat of consciousness, this revolution in the deepest seat of consciousness, which is paravritti, can also mean revulsion. It means the complete expulsion of all the unskillful seeds, all the traces of unskillful action from the deepest part of consciousness. There's a great sort of churning of the depths of samsara, if you like. Shantideva's confession seems to be like that. He's sort of gathering up, as it were, becoming aware of all of the unskillfulness that he has done, and he's confessing it. He's opening it up to the light of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, to the Bodhicitta. And there is this expression, tormented with remorse. This is another aspect of confession. Confession is only really effective, yes, when there's inspiration, when there's the vision of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, but they also say another way of making confession effective, an essential part of that, is remorse, shame, hri, apatrapya, shame in relation to your ideals, what you're trying to become, shame in relation to your spiritual friends. And you sort of burn with that remorse. Hri, it means to blush. It's the same as the seed syllable as Amitabha. It's that enlightenment rising up in you and making you more aware of your shortcomings and your failings. You bring all that out in relation to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Sometimes I think we can be sort of frightened of opening to our remorse and our shame. You sometimes say, well, I don't want to feel guilty. You know, somebody's done something obviously unskillful, they've harmed somebody, and they say, but I'm not going to feel guilty about it. And one wants to say, well, don't feel guilty about it, but what about shame? What about remorse? What about the rising up of your conscience? That's important. That's going to motivate you to go deeper in your practice and to change things. Shantideva goes even further in relation to this. One of the ways in which he confesses, one of the things he brings to mind is awareness of death. They're very, very strong in the verses. He talks about really wanting to escape from the effects of his actions. He knows, very well he's got to work on himself and change himself to really escape. He's got to attain enlightenment. But he's concerned, his big fear that he will die before he's been purified, and then all bets are off. He's, as it were, at the mercy of the winds of karma, as it's called in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The winds of unskillful action, of the effects of unskillful action, blowing you know not where, blowing you away from the bodhicitta. So one of the ways in which he, almost intensifies the confession is by bringing to mind awareness of death. Night and day, my life advances to destruction. Nothing can stop it. I must surely die, he says. And I've done many unskillful things out of likes and dislikes because of people I've loved and people I've loathed. People I've loved, I've had indulged in so much craving and attachment, done so much harm through that. People I've loathed through being full of hatred and, even violence towards people. So likes and dislikes have motivated me and have caused so many problems, so much unskillfulness, so much bad effect, so much evil. And there's that very, very poignant line in one translation which goes something like, what I hate will cease to be, what I love will cease to be, I will cease to be, all will cease to be. This is death. He doesn't mean that, of course, he's very aware that there is going to be rebirth, but that's what will happen. Yes, we invest so many things. We do so many things in our lives, so many unskillful things out of likes and dislikes. But in the end, for what? He does a lot of reflecting on how, again, the sort of fleeting nature of life. He describes himself as a stranger to this life. Another translation describes himself as a fleeting wraith in this life, just coming through, doing all sorts of unskillful things, generating the effects of unskillful actions for what? Then it vanishes. Then it goes. So there's tremendous, in some ways tremendous fear that he talks about for being unskillful. This is very difficult, I think, for people. When we study the Bodhicaryavatara, I think, again, people think this is just too much. Shantideva's going too far in using this language. We can't practice like this. And I've always tried to imagine myself in his position, his perspective. Maybe I can't have that perspective, but why is he like this? Well, for a start, there is the vision of the Bodhicitta. He wants to be one, if you like, with Bodhicitta, with the force of wisdom and compassion in the world. He wants to fully serve that. That's the most beautiful, most meaningful thing in existence. That's the best thing you can possibly do, to gain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So there's that. But he also has the perspective of infinite lifetimes, of the effects of actions going on. He's got that in his mind as well. So he's aware that he's got so much karmic baggage that he doesn't even know about. And that's a frightening thought. He doesn't want to lose that bodhicitta. He doesn't want to lose connection with it. He says at one point, well, he goes on to go for refuge in the context of confession. He asks the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, well, he says, well, our going for refuge verses actually emerge, the going for refuge verses from the Bodhicaryavatara, emerge in the midst of the confessional verses. This very day I go for my refuge to the powerful protectors, whose purpose is to guard the universe. He says at one point in these verses, be my protectors, keep in connection with me, so that death does not take me before I have been purified. So he's asking the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Dharma, the Sangha, to be the refuge, to be that point of security in his life. Of course, that they're not sort of gods that come out of nowhere that can just protect you without your cooperation. He's using this to, as it were, galvanize, to stimulate, to arouse the powerful forces of spiritual practice. That's what he's trying to do in these verses, where there's tremendous, tremendous remorse and fear, and also tremendous dedication to put things right. So our confession verses that we have in our own puja, these are the last verses of the confession section. The evil that I have heaped up through my ignorance and foolishness, evil in the world of everyday experience, as well as evil in understanding and intelligence, all that I acknowledge to the protectors. Standing before them, with hands raised in reverence, and terrified of suffering, I pay salutations again and again. May the leaders receive this kindly, just as it is with its many faults. What is not good, O protectors, I shall not do again. So as well as the verses invoking the inspiring presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, as well as this remorse, as well as this healthy fear of consequences, there is the resolve to act differently, to behave differently. This is very, very important in confession. Buddhist confession understands very well that you have the power to change your life. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can support you, they can inspire you, but in the end, you have to take, and you can take, full responsibility for putting things right. So if you've been unskillful to other people, apologize, put it right. If you have unskillful tendencies, put into place the practices that will change those tendencies. Take vows, if you like, or make precepts to change, to go in a different direction. It is a very sobering time. I was talking to my sister the other day, and she had to go to hospital for chemotherapy, just going in for a day's treatment, and she said the atmosphere in the ward in which she was being pumped full of these chemicals to well, to keep, to help her in her chronic illness, which makes her very vulnerable. She said usually in these wards people are very chatty, very friendly, and she also talked about how wonderful the staff were and how kind the nursing staff were, and the way they were caring for everybody. But she said this time, because of what's going on with the coronavirus, the mood was one of great sobriety, quite somber. And in a way, that is appropriate. We're feeling that here, even this beautiful Padmaloka. We feel a kind of somber quality, a kind of sobriety is around. I mean, we're joyful, we're getting on very well together, but there is a kind of mood that death is stalking us. It's out there, and the world is in trouble, the world is in difficulty, particularly in difficulty. More and more people are aware of being in difficulty. And at this time, perhaps, this is a time to be aware of the unskillfulness that we've done, the things that we've said, the things that we've done that have hurt others, the way we've fallen out with people. Perhaps this is a time, more than any other time, because of this awareness of death, to put things right, to make friends with people, to apologise with people, to confess our faults with one another, to develop a completely clear conscience. Clear conscience. This is regarded as a really important mental state. A really clear conscience. The Buddha talks about this a lot in the Pali Canon. That you have nothing to reproach yourself with regard to your ethics, with regard to your behaviour. If you really feel that, if you've checked yourself, it's sometimes good to check yourself at the end of every day. Today, can I say I have nothing to reproach myself in relation to my Buddhist practice, in relation to my life? Have I behaved well all day? And if you can say, yes, actually, I've got a clear conscience. I've done really well today. I've been positive, I've been creative, I've been skillful. That might have involved apologising to people if we have been unskillful. But we've done that. The conscience is clear. Meditate on that. Rejoice in that. That's a really important state. To unburden yourself. The great Je, the great Tiantai meditation master who wrote Dhyana for Beginners, said one of the main obstacles to success in meditation is feeling remorse and guilt. And it's really important to purify that. What does he say? Through which? Through lots of puja, lots of incense burning, lots of sutra recitation, lots of confession, lots of chanting. Then you have a clear conscience. And then when there's clear conscience, the clear conscience that you've acted more fully in relation to the bodhicitta, then there is joy, then there is rejoicing. And next week we're going to look at Shantideva's joy and rejoicing and the freedom that he feels to fully accept the bodhicitta and to take the bodhisattva vow. But that's for next week. So thank you very much for listening.